to Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Gentlemen, thank you for your service. Thank you for being here. We've talked a little bit about the Russian playbook, right? Extortion, bribery, false news, disinformation. They all sound very familiar, correct? Well, as we talk, without thinking about anybody in the United States, just generally the Russian playbook and how it's worked in particularly Eastern Europe and Central Europe, a lot of it involves trying to influence individuals in that country, correct?
Yes.
So what we've talked about a little bit today seems to be sort of a black and white notion of whether there was collusion. But does a Russian active measure attempting to succeed at collusion, does the person involved have to actually know? I mean, does it have to involve knowing collusion for there to be damage?
I can answer generally. In the world of intelligence, oftentimes there are people who are called co-optees, who are acting, don't realize they're dealing with agents of a foreign power, and so are doing things for someone they think is a friend or a business associate, not realizing it's for the foreign government. So it can happen, and it's actually quite a frequent technique.
And is it beyond that sometimes to include things where the actor doesn't necessarily know what they're doing is helping that other government?
Exactly.
And what are instances, just examples of what that might include in a generic sense in Europe and so forth?
Oftentimes a researcher here in the United States, they think they're dealing with a peer researcher in a foreign government and not knowing that that researcher is either knowingly or unwittingly passing information to a foreign adversary of the United States.
And can you explain and elaborate how this sort of problems with defining what collusion is, the differences that might be involved with explicit or implicit collusion?
Collusion is not a legal term of art, and it's one I haven't used here today. I said we're investigating to see whether there was any coordination between people associated with the campaign.
Explicit or implicit coordination?
Well, I guess implicit, I would think of it as knowing or unknowing. Right. You can do things to help a foreign nation state, as I said, without realizing that you're dealing with, you think you're helping a buddy who's a researcher at a university in China, when what you're actually doing is passing information that ends up with the Chinese government. That's unwitting. I don't know whether it's the same as your implicit. Explicit would be, I'm sending this stuff to this researcher in China, and I'm doing it because I want to help the Chinese government, and I know he's hooked up with the Chinese government.
Admiral Rogers, would you give other examples of what you've witnessed in your career?
Sometimes U.S. individuals will be approached by other individuals connected with foreign connections who will misrepresent what not just the researcher, they'll assume an identity, if you will. Hey, I want you to think that I'm actually working for a business, exploring a commercial interest, those kinds of things, create a relationship, and then it turns out there really is no commercial interest here. They're acting as a direct extension of a foreign government.
And romance can be a feature. Right? Somebody dating someone to create a close relationship, and the U.S. government person thinks that they're in love with this person, and vice versa, and the other person is actually an agent of a foreign power. That's sort of a classic example.
Describe this as naive actions?
I'm not sure I know what that means.
I don't know what that really means.
You're going along with it without really acknowledging, understanding in your mind, or being naive about the issue.
Sure, that can happen.
You see that at times.
Okay. Going on to things that you probably can't comment upon, which is of equal concern. We're all, at this point, very familiar with Mr. Sessions' testimony before the United States Senate, in which he specifically said he wasn't one who had this contact with the Russians. And then there was the amended, testimony in which he acknowledged, I believe, two such testimonies. The first was in July during the convention, and then later in September afterwards. All the while that the issues that we are talking about today, the hacking, the dumping of materials were taking place, and certainly someone in the position of Mr. Senator Sessions would have been aware of this, perhaps would have remembered these conversations, or might have mentioned ask the Russian ambassador to knock it off. But apparently none of those things happened, or at least he didn't remember that they happened. Unfortunately, what we're reading now is that there was a third meeting as early as April of last year in Washington, D.C., a meeting in which candidate Trump was president and the Russian ambassador was president. At some point in time, this goes well beyond an innocent, under the best of circumstances, oh, I forgot sort of thing, or that doesn't count. When you correct your testimony in front of the United States Senate, you're still under oath, and you're swearing to the American people that what you're saying is true. So the third is well beyond that and is quite simply perjury. So as we look at this, as we go forward, gentlemen, I ask that you take that into consideration. This is far more than what we have talked about, just in the general sense, did the Russians hack or not, and the scope of this, to a concerted effort and plan to lie to the American public about what took place and what the motivations were beyond this process. Again, I thank you for your service, and I yield back.